Okay.
All right. Today's lesson is one of those that I am really happy about to teach. I've had 2 weeks to study for it, so I've gotten to think about it and really get into some things that I wanted to think about. But sometimes when you're doing a Bible study and you're trying to get things ready, you really don't think about the implications. And so I was studying Paul and I was going, well, okay, we had just left Paul in Athens. And last time we spoke, Athens was not a good place for Paul. It wasn't a good place for him mentally, psychologically, or anything, socially, any of those, Calvin. It just wasn't. And so what do you do when you're so beat down that you don't know what to do and you don't know where to turn?
Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus.
Go on vacation.
Okay, you kind of tell it to Jesus, go on vacation. What else would you do?
Change your attitude.
Change your attitude. In this case, Paul gets a haircut. And when I started reading this, I was going, I read through it because we're going to study the 18th chapter of the book of Acts. And so I was reading everything that was going on in the book of Acts. And then all of a sudden I get to Acts 18 and 18. I went, oh, wait a minute. Now I have to do things left-handed. Because left-handers do everything a different way. We think differently. And most left-handers, speaking for me personally, I like to start at the end and work my way backwards. Now I've got the haircut. Now I need to explain it. So this is my whole explanation of why Paul got a haircut. Yes?
It's a natural.
Is what?
I just saw, natural ball. The haircut.
Yeah.
What you mentioned before. What the Jewish people do.
Yes.
Jerusalem.
Yes.
That's
what we're going to talk about. See, you got it all together. It's kind of cool. And I will tell you, a lot of Americans probably couldn't put 2 and 2 together to figure that one out.
Why?
Because we just don't. But this is what happens. So let's look at this for a second. Oops. I've got to go stick this into the computer. I thought I was ready. I will be running back.
Speaking from a woman's attitude or perspective, some of the times when we have a bad attitude, you can go to the hairdresser and get a new hairdo and you feel better.
That's right. That's true. So let's look at our journey for a second. We started in Troas. We went over into Europe now. And does anybody remember what happened in Philippi? There was an earthquake. They were put somewhere.
The prisoner.
Yes, the Philippian jailer. And do you remember who was the first person that was probably saved in Europe? And it was not a man.
The woman, Lydia.
Lydia. Very good. So we had that in Lydia. Then, whoops, it went on down. What happened in Thessalonica and Berea? Does anybody remember there?
Thessalonica, they ran him out, and Berea, they were accepting.
That's right. And then in Athens, what happens?
Oh, preach on Mars Hill.
The preach on Mars Hill. Now let me tell you, look at this. This whole sermon, or second missionary journey, was 2 years long. All of this happened in 6 months. He stayed here for 1.5 years. There's got to be a reason. And that's why I started thinking about all this. There's a mention of a haircut. There's mention of staying here for 18 months or 1.5 years. Something was going on in Corinth. And so what I did is I put this in here because while looking at Timothy. While Paul was in Athens, he sent Timothy back to Thessalonica. Remember, the Thessalonians were the ones that ran him out of town because he was preaching something and they weren't happy. But yet there was a small group of believers. And this is what really interests me, that no matter what Paul's shape was, mentally, physically, emotionally, or anything, He was always concerned about those people around him. And he sent Timothy back to Thessalonica. What did he do to Silas? He sends him back all the way back up to Philippi, or Macedonia, or that area. So here he is. He sends his entourage, or his group of people that supported him away from him to go check back on in Philippi and in Thessalonica. And so Paul leaves for Corinth all by himself, or he's escorted. No, he leaves by himself, that's right. He leaves by himself. And so I want to really get into what was Paul thinking. Because when we get so down and when we get so discouraged, we really need to think about our own lives. And I think at this time, Paul started really thinking about, who am I? What am I? Am I doing what God wants me to do? Because I will say this, Corinth was not the place you really wanted to stay and try to evangelize, because they had a lot of idolatry worship in there. They had a lot. I think it's Aphrodite, the temple at Aphrodite there, where they had all the prostitutes there. And prostitution was legal in this city, so much so that everybody ran to the prostitutes. There were thousands of prostitutes in this city. And all of a sudden, Paul's trying to go there. And it just kind of makes you wonder. So first of all, Paul struggled with polytheism. Remember, all throughout his missionary journey, he was talking about the way and the belief in how many gods? One true God. And that Jesus was the Son of Man. That's what he tried to do. And when you try to talk to somebody who believes in multiple gods, that's hard. Because it's hard to convince them. It's hard to talk to them. And I can only imagine by studying the Sermon on Mars Hill that he did the best he could. And do you remember what the people in Athens did?
Ignore.
Yeah, they kind of ignored him and said, oh, y'all, you're interesting. Why don't you just come back and talk? We really don't believe what you're talking about, but we'd like to hear your philosophy more. And sometimes it's better just to walk away. And when he went to Corinth, he spent most of his time alone. And I will change the focus of being alone in just a minute. But you have to know he traveled all there by himself. And how many of us really like to be alone?
Yes.
It's scary sometimes to be alone, isn't it?
Yes.
Trust me. I'll turn that off in just a minute, Terry.
Okay.
I've got it for the video to
That's
play.
okay, that's okay.
And like Friday. Friday was my mental health day. I was so excited. I lost my phone on purpose. I left it at church, not on purpose, but I left it there so no one could get in contact with me on Friday. Do you know how great that was? I got so excited because I could actually do what I wanted to do, and I wasn't bound by a computer, and I wasn't bound by a phone. And sometimes we just need to spend that time alone. It's good for you. Also, the thing we can say is, according to another book of the Bible that Paul wrote, he said Athens probably made him feel a little intimidated. Now, do you truly understand what it means to be intimidated?
Scary.
Yeah.
In front of me.
Yes, and it's like, oh, so you know all this and I don't know anything. And when you get to the feeling of, oh, I don't know anything, sometimes you get really depressed. And just by reading Paul's words in 1 Corinthians, I get a true sense that Paul actually did go through some depression here. Because it says he felt so intimidated. However, this is where everything changes. He talks about that intimidation, which really, to me, is like a depression. He feels it, but then he does this in the next verse. He resolves. He says, I am going to make a commitment. I am going to make a commitment. And that commitment is, I am not going to know anything else, and I'm only going to focus on Jesus who died on the cross. I tell you what, if you can get to this point in your life, you don't have a lot of depression. Because if that is our main focus in our lives, that's what makes us go. Christ dying on the cross for me. And when you think about that Christ dying on the cross for me, there's a whole lot of peace and a whole lot of contentment that comes with resolving this. And this is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this resolution because I have this little short video I want to play for you of a famous actor today who really summarizes Paul's life to a T. And let's see if you can figure out who he is. Let's see if I can get this to go without throwing it back there. Nope. Okay. Okay. Oops. Let's see if I can get this going. Got the volume. I hear it. Okay, I may have to just play it.
My life, and I want to share it. I love living. I think that's infectious. It's something that you can't fake. Greatness is not this wonderful, esoteric, elusive, God-like feature that only the special among us will ever taste. You know, it's something that truly exists in all of us. It's very simple. This is what I believe, and I'm willing to die for it. Period. It's that simple.
I know who I am, and I know what I believe.
I know who I am, I know what I believe.
That's all I need to know.
That's all I need to know. So from there, you do what you need to do.
Yeah.
You know, and I think what happens is we make this situation more complex than it has to be.
Because we're looking for complexity. There's got to be something complex to understand.
It can't be that easy.
I mean, when I thought about this and I saw this video, I was going, how cool is that? This is what I believe, and this is what I'm going to do, and that's all I'm going to do.
And you'd be willing to die for it.
And you're willing to die for that.
He's Will Smith.
Yes, that's Will Smith. That is his philosophy on everything. This is what I believe, and I'm willing to die for what I believe.
He believes in God.
I would assume so.
Really?
I would assume so. I mean, that is something all key in us. If you are willing to die for something, you are willing to commit yourself to something. And when you're willing to commit, you fully understand what Christ did for you. Because what did Christ do for you?
Everything.
Everything, and what did He do? He died for you. Just like Will Smith said, be willing to believe what you believe in and be willing to die for it. That's what it is. And that's why I got so stuck and I started looking at Acts 18 and 18 and I went, okay, so really I need to look at Acts 18 and 18 first and then go back and explain everything that happened in Corinth. So if you'll look or turn in your Bibles to Acts 18 and 18, you'll get this little side comment, and I really think it's interesting that one little sentence can really help us understand why Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half. And Anna, would you like to read that?
保罗又住了多日，就辞别了弟兄，坐船往叙利亚去。百基拉、雅居拉和他同去。他因为许过愿， 就在间隔里剪了头发。
There you go. Just a little comment. He had his hair cut off. And because of what we have studied in the book of James and everything before that, we know that getting the hair cut off is very significant. Because it totally means a frame of mind, a reference, a time to renew ourselves, and a time to recommit. Because, we'll get to that in just a second. So the first thing that Paul did when he went to Corinth, and it clearly says this, that he focused upon Christ crucified. All of his actions were going to be based on what Jesus did for me. And when you think about that and you renew yourself about the crucifixion of Christ, your world becomes a better place. And so that's what happens, because this focus allows the working of the Holy Spirit when we have the least to offer. And I truly believe that. When you believe that Christ died on the cross for you, and you submit yourself to that, and you let God work in your life, there's a lot of things you never thought you could do. It will happen. And that's the thing we need to look at. Because the next thing is, Paul commits himself to continuing what he started. Remember, he was in Athens, and we read, or I showed you up here on the screen, that he felt a little intimidated. He kind of felt a little out of place, but then sometime in Corinth, he decided to do something about it. And what he did is he spent some time alone and says, I am going to focus my attention on Christ being crucified, and I'm going to continue doing what God wants me to do. And so let's read that in Acts 18:4. Like I said, this lesson is all about jumping around in the 18th chapter. But if we'll look at Acts 18:4, and what page is that on? 243. Okay. Acts 18:4, page 243.
每逢安息日，保罗在会堂里辩论，劝化犹太人和希腊人。
So what did he do in 18:4?
He was in the synagogue of the church every Sabbath,
He went back
and he tried to reason with them.
and he tried to reason. I guarantee you, if you read 1 Corinthians and you feel that intimidation, are you going to be a little hesitant about going back after you've taken a severe beating in Athens? A lot of us would just quit. We would quit. I mean, it's like people who like to play the piano. I've had several students who come in, and their first lesson, they want to start playing something that they can't play for 8 or 9 years down the road, and they can't understand. I have to go through this process. I have to commit myself. And then I get them started, and they go, you mean I have to practice? You mean I have to practice daily? And they just get so upset, and then they quit. They do. Because playing the piano is a daily thing. Walking with God is a daily thing. You have to do it every day to get closer to Him. And Paul, what did he do? He set foot and went back into the synagogue. The next thing is, here we go, Anna. This ought to make you happy. Because we know that in 1818, he had his hair cut off. He started the Nazarite vow. Does everybody remember the components of the Nazarite vow? Go ahead, William. Say some of them.
You have to go to temple.
Well, yes, that's it. But what about your hair?
You have to cut off and
You don't cut it off.
Well, you burn them.
Don't comb it.
Yeah.
You don't do anything. You let your hair grow. How many of you could do that for 18 months? I guarantee you, at the end of 18 months, it didn't look pretty good. I don't think so.
They didn't comb it?
They didn't want to break it. So there are some Nazarites who didn't and some did, but they didn't wash their, they let their hair grow. What else did they not do? What about what they ate?
They abstained from wine.
They abstained from wine,
Didn't drink vinegar.
didn't drink any vinegar. They
Grape.
only ate
No. Dang it.
bugs
Yeah.
and honey, kind of stuff like that. And they avoided going where? Do you remember?
Graves.
By dead bodies. So all the time in Corinth, Paul was focused in upon this vow, which meant that he focused his attention upon who?
God.
God. And because of this, he became very renewed in his energy and his commitment to God. Because that's what the Nazarite vow was supposed to do. It was supposed to renew your energy in Yahweh. But now he renewed because he wanted to continue this. So the second thing is, when he did what he did, focused upon Christ crucified, then God provides when we are committed to him. Look at all the wonderful things that happened to Paul in Corinth. The first thing is, he provides some strong support for him. And let's look at Acts 18, verses 2 and 5.
遇见一个犹太人，名叫雅居拉，他生在本都，因为革老丢命犹太人都离开罗马，新近带着妻百基拉从意大利来，保罗就投奔了他们。
Okay, so what happens in 18:2 and 18:5?
Met some friends.
He got some really good friends, some lifelong friends. In fact, he provides what I call support structures. All of a sudden, when you refocus, guess what? You really see people as they are, and you see people come to your assistance. And that's what happens when you recommit yourself to God. You see these support structures, and you see all this love that takes place. And this is what Paul needed more than anything. And I want to spend a whole lesson on just that one statement. Because there's so much to it. Because I read that Paul went through the agora, or the marketplace, and he met these tent makers. And these tent makers are Priscilla and Aquila. These tent makers came from Rome, who got expelled, and oh yeah, they just so happened to be in Corinth. They knew about God, but then they invited Paul to come in and live with them. And they made things together. Just think about that for a minute. How many of you would like to sit by Paul every day for 18 months and just work and talk?
That'd be cool.
Isn't that neat? That's what happened. That's what happened right here. Because what does he do? He meets his lifelong friends. And I guarantee you, in this lesson and in next week's lesson, you're going to see what kind of importance that Priscilla and Aquila did in Paul's life. And I will tell you this, by sitting there on a daily basis and listening to Paul, when they go to the next place, which we'll talk about next week, which is Ephesus, I'm so excited. We're talking about Ephesus. These two people just revolutionized the church. They did it. And they did it, believe it or not, a lot like what's going on in China today. They did it this way. And it's amazing. And the best part is, his two other buddies come back. Silas and Timothy come. So when you see it, and when you recommit yourself to God, and you say, this is what God, I'm going to just focus on Him. He provides the support structures. And look at the third thing. He provides necessary signs that He's still working. Because you have to understand, God has always been working in the past. He's always working in the future. And you're just joining Him along this little narrow point called our life. And this is what happens. When we commit ourselves to God, we start seeing things we've never seen before. And this recommitment to God that Paul did in Corinth, he met Priscilla and Aquila. Silas and Timothy come back. Then all of a sudden, here's what happens. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, accepts Jesus. Let's read this in 18, 7 through 11.
7 through 11.
7 through 11.
OK，于是他离开那里，到了一个人的家中，这人名叫提多，犹士都是敬拜神的。 他的家靠近会堂，管会堂的基利斯布和全家都信了主，还有许多哥林多人听了都相信受洗。夜间主在异象中对保罗说：“不要怕，主管讲，不要闭口，有我与你同在，必没有人下手害你，因为在这城里我有许多百姓。”保罗在那里住了1年零6个月，将神的道教训他们。
Look at what happens in this narrow frame of scriptures. Have we ever studied, since we started Paul, that a synagogue leader believed? When we recommit ourselves, God allows certain things that normally shouldn't happen. And in this case, we see that Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, is saved. And what does it say that happens because this ruler, synagogue person was saved? Many others were saved. That's what happens when we commit ourselves to God. And when we truly dedicate ourselves and we surround ourselves with the people that God's put in our lives, things like this happen. Many people. It doesn't say one person was saved, it says many. And that's what we need to understand. When God's working in our lives and we are focused upon Him and we see Him working and join Him, lots of things can happen. And that's what happened here. God supports us through various ways. And I can't wait to tell you what I found out next week. It's the cliffhanger. Because I really started going to open my mouth and talk about Priscilla and Aquila here, because I know some things, because I've already studied, but I have to wait till next week. Because I just opens my mind up to those interesting components of Paul's life that we don't know. He finds a job. And God reassures him that he's doing what he's doing. That he should be doing.
And we need that.
Boy, do we need that.
We really do.
And that's what I am so excited about in this whole thing. Remember, he has taken a Nazarite vow. And this is something we've not really, I've never heard a sermon stress this. But he took a vow. And because he took a vow, he got renewed. And because he got renewed, all of these things happened, and he stayed in Corinth for 18 months. He didn't stay anywhere else in the first 2 missionary journeys as long as he stayed in Corinth. What should that tell us about our commitment to God? I
Stay
mean,
the course.
you've got to stay it. You've got to really do it. And that's what gets me, because look at the reassurance here. It says in verse 9, "Do not be afraid to speak and do not keep silent, for I am with you." God told him that. I am with you. And guess what? When you accept Jesus into your life, and you accept Him to your heart, and you commit to Him, He's with you as well. And you have that no one else has. And you want other people to have it. Because it says, I am with you. And look at this. This is the reassurance that we should all realize in our own lives, this next part. "And no one will attack you to hurt you, for I have many people in the city." If I get hurt and I'm not feeling good, guess what I get to do? I can call anybody in this room. Because I know you care about me. That's what God's telling him. And that's what Jesus was telling him, and everybody was. I am with you, and no one can hurt you, because you've got all these people that are supporting you. And that's what the Christian life is all about. Is all these people that are around you, that are supporting you, that treat you like family. And Paul got a true sense of family in Corinth. So much so that he kind of uprooted it and took him where he went. Because he had that structure. So Paul's commitment to God helped him avoid the temptation in the city. Because he was focused in upon Christ crucified, and he had took that Nazarite vow, he didn't go around anywhere that might cause him to be tempted. And you have to understand, this city was so big with prostitution that it was easy to find one. It was so easy to be lured into fleshly desires and wants that were apart from God. But he avoided it. Second thing is, he extended his stay. In fact,